Hi, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to do a review with you real quick about Anglo-Saxon literature and what was happening in that time period, because this week you will be reading Beowulf, which is a long epic poem written during this time. And then I wanted to review and kind of go over The Wanderer with you because we didn't get to do the discussion board. So here we go. Okay, so if you remember from last week, I gave you some videos to watch about Anglo-Saxon, that time period of them. We know that in about the 1st century CE, the Romans had established themselves on the British Isles. Oh, that would help if I put it full screen. Sorry, y'all. They had established themselves on the British Isles. When they came, they brought with them the Latin language, and for nearly 300 years, Latin was the language of the ruling elite. And so that's why in English, Latin plays a huge role in our roots and affixes that we use in our language, because our background is the Latin language. And so that's what originated the way that we speak today. When the Romans abandoned Britain at the start of the 5th century, the Jutes, the Angles, and the Saxons all came over. And by mid 5th century, they had established permanent settlements on these islands. We know from history books and historians that this particular group of people were what we would call barbarians. They were very warlike, they were very fierce, they were ferocious, they were cruel, they had completely wiped out the Celts. They were unforgiving, and they were very strong, courageous, loyal to a fault, fiercely loyal, and they had a lot of pride. To them, they believed that the best way to die was in service of their lords or chieftains or kings or what have you. And the worst thing to happen would be to be captured during war, during a battle, and to have your leadership and your comrades die, and you would be left alone with the guilt of surviving, right? Of being captured and not being able to save them. So to them, war was life, and take no prisoners was kind of their attitude, and don't become a prisoner. Okay, so let's see. The Anglo-Saxon literature, you can see kind of two sides to it. So you have your pre-Christian influences. You're going to really see this when we start reading Beowulf this week. They had a pagan lifestyle. They didn't know God. They were not Christians. They hadn't been introduced to the concept of a higher deity that reigned over everyone. Nature, they lived in nature. They lived by nature. And so in the Anglo-Saxon literature, you're going to see a lot of nature references, with the gods and the goddesses and magic, and all of that is very, very affixed to nature itself. So in this type of literature, you're going to see a lot of narratives like sea voyages, battles, acts of vigor and passion. They led very adventurous lives. They didn't really stay put in one spot. Their homestead was, but they adventured out, and they were involved in battles all the time. That was their livelihood. If you think of Vikings, that's the same time period. And honestly, you have your Scandinavian people who were the Vikings came over around the same time period. And so that's where most of the stories from Beowulf actually originated from, which we'll talk about hopefully tomorrow. And then, let's see, I lost my place in my notes. So much of the Anglo-Saxon prose and poetry of this time period displays the pagan heritage and consists of these types of narratives. Towards the end of the 6th century, Christian missionaries from Rome had arrived, and they began to convert the kingdom, the British Isles in general. And so by the middle of the 7th century, Christianity had actually been established in almost all of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and areas. So you have your pagan belief system paired with your Christian belief system, which you actually saw in The Wanderer. And so, of course, God is first. We have to, instead of, king first and comrades first, it's God is first. And everything that we do is for God, for him. They believed in heaven and the afterlife, right? And the soul. And so whenever you die, your physical body is gone, but your soul rises and goes into heaven and lives forever. So Anglo-Saxons, even though they were drenched in all this war and fighting and what seems like anger and terribleness, they actually did enjoy singing and having fun and acts of merriment. Songs and poetry were extremely popular at that time. In fact, poems were generally sang. That's the way that they wrote them. They wrote them as songs. Not the kind of songs that you listen to today, but still. They really thought that the poet was one of the most valued people in their groups, in their areas, and poets generally traveled from one kingdom or one group of people to the next. Everything was oral. They did not have a written language. And so when you read this literature, you have to understand that it wasn't something that people looked at in a book and then read the lines. They actually heard it. And so that's why when we read things like The Wanderer and Beowulf, and later when we read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and et cetera, these are all oral tellings. They weren't written down first. They weren't written down until a long time later. And then you're going to see, of course, a lot of nature in these pieces of literature. So in The Wanderer, you can clearly see the heroic pre-Christian belief that fame is all you have. There is no immortality. All you leave with is your name. That's all that's left behind when you go. And so it was really important to have something that people would remember your name by. And so all this is paired with the Christian belief that earthly life is transitory. We're not going to be on earth forever. We go somewhere after we perish, right? So our physical body dies, but our soul lives on. And so The Wanderer is a good demonstration of this contrast. The lost man is feeling like his life is over because he lost his Lord, he lost his comrades, but he's trying to retain his Christian beliefs at the end of the poem. Okay, so let's take a look. I did kind of copy and paste these on here, but it's going to be hard to read, so you'll just bear with me. The Wanderer does come from the Exeter book. The Exeter book is the oldest compilation of poems and prose that we have found, and it dates back to the late 10th century. Now, the book itself dates back to the late 10th century, right? But the poems and the stuff written in it are older than that. So The Wanderer is from longer ago than the 10th century. That's pretty old, y'all. It's considered an elegiac poem or an elegy. That means it's a lament for something that's been lost. There are 115 lines, and it's all alliterative verse. Remember that alliteration is the same beginning sound. The composer of the poet, that doesn't make sense. The composer of the poem and the individuals who put the actual Exeter book together are both anonymous. Nobody knows who they are. This poem conveys meditations of solitary exile. The speaker is left behind after a battle. He is the sole survivor as far as we know, and it definitely makes it sound like that. Okay, so as we read, well, let's just start reading. So we know that the speaker is referred to as an earth stepper, and he's the sole survivor of this fierce war slaughter. At the beginning, fate is opening up the memory, and the speaker is seeing these horrifying memories over and over again. So it says, this lonely traveler longs for grace, for the mercy of God grief hangs on his heart and follows the frost cold foam. He cuts in the sea, sailing endlessly, aimlessly in exile. Fate has opened a single port, memory. He sees his kinsmen slaughtered again and cries, I've drunk too many lonely dawns, gray with morning. Once there were men, to whom my heart could hurry, hot with open longing. They're long since dead. My heart has closed on itself, quietly learning that silence is noble and sorrow, nothing that speech can cure. Sadness has never driven sadness off. Fate blows hardest on a bleeding heart. So those who thirst for glory smother secret weakness and longing, neither weep nor sigh, nor listen to the sickness in their souls. So I, lost and homeless, forced to flee the darkness that fell on the earth on my Lord. And so we have this really depressing kind of mood portrayed here. This tone, it doesn't make you happy, right? It's not a happy poem. He's very sad. He's very grieving. Leaving everything, weary with winter, I wandered out on the frozen waves, hoping to find a place, a people, a Lord to replace my lost ones. No one knew me now. No one offered comfort, allowed me feasting or joy. How cruel a journey I've traveled, sharing my bread with sorrow, alone, in exile in every land, could only be told by telling my footsteps. So we know that he's wandering all alone. He's very lonely. Nobody is offering him help. Nobody is trying to pull him in. And so he's wandering around all by himself. For who can hear, friendless and poor, and know what I've known since the long, cheerful nights, when young and yearning with my Lord I yet feasted, most welcome of all. That warmth is dead. He only knows who needs his Lord as I do, eager for long missing aid. He only knows who never sleeps without the deepest dreams of longing. Sometimes it seems I see my Lord kiss and embrace him. That's my bad. Kiss and embrace him, bend my hands and head to his knee, kneeling as though he still sat enthroned, ruling his things. And so we know from those lines that the king of the master has been dethroned. He's no longer there. And I open my eyes, embracing the air, and see the brown sea billows heave. See the seabirds bathe, spreading their white feathered wings, watch the frost and the hail and the snow, and heavy in heart I long for my Lord, alone and unloved. Sometimes it seems I see my kin and greet them wildly, give them welcome, the best of friends. They fade away, swimming soundlessly out of sight, leaving nothing. And so he remembers these happy times, and it almost takes him over and gives him this feeling of elation. But then he remembers that it's not real, and he no longer has any of that stuff. And so it leaves as quickly as it came, and he's left grieving still. How loathsome become the frozen waves to a weary heart. In this brief world, I cannot wonder that my mind is set on melancholy, because I never forget the fate of men robbed of their riches, suddenly looted by death, the doom of earth, sent to us all by every rising sun. Wisdom is slow and comes but late. He who has it is patient. He cannot be hasty to hate or speak. He must be bold and not yet blind, nor ever too craven, complacent, or covetous, nor ready to gloat before he wins glory. The man's a fool who flings his boasts hotly to the heavens, heating his spleen, and not the better boldness of knowledge. What knowing man knows not the ghostly, waste-like end of worldly wealth. See, already the wreckage is there. The wind-swept walls stand far and wide. The storm-beaten blocks besmeared with frost. The mead halls crumbled, the monarchs thrown down and stripped of their pleasures. The proudest of warriors now lie by the wall, some of them war-destroyed, some the monstrous seabird bore over the ocean, to some the old wolf dealt out death, and for some dejected followers fashioned an earth-hid coffin. Thus the maker of men lays waste this earth, crushing our callow mirth, and the work of old giants stands withered and still. And so he sees kind of these old ruins in his mind. He sees what used to be this glorious place where he lived with his Lord and his comrades in arms, and he's saying, what was it for? What a waste, right? It was all wasted. They're all dead. They're all gone from the earth, as if they were never there to begin with. He who these ruins rightly sees and deeply considers this dark, twisted life, who sagely remembers the endless slaughters of a bloody past, is bound to proclaim, where is the war steed? Where is the warrior? Where is his warlord? Where now the feasting places? Where now the mead hall pleasures? Alas, bright cup, alas, brave knight, alas, you glorious princes, all gone, lost in the night, as you never had lived, and all that survives you, a serpentine wall, wondrously high, worked in some strange ways. Mighty spears have slain these men, greedy weapons have framed their fate. So he's kind of saying what greed gets you, right? All these men are going and attacking other people, and for what? Because you want more wealth, right? They want more wealth for themselves. But then what happens? Somebody else comes along to take your wealth, and you're gone. You don't get to take those worldly pleasures and possessions with you whenever you go. So what's the point of it? Where now the feasting places? Where now the mead hall pleasures? Oh, I already read that part. I'm sorry. These rocky slopes are beaten by storms, this earth pinned down by driving snow, by the horror of winter, smothering warmth in the shadows of night. And the north angrily hurls its hailstorms at our helpless heads. Everything earthly is evilly born, firmly clutched by a fickle fate. Fortune vanishes, friendships vanishes. Man is fleeting, woman is fleeting, and all this earth rolls into emptiness. Man and woman don't live forever, right? So what is the point of all this fighting and warmongering and selfish behavior while we're on earth? Because it's not going to come with us when we go. So says the sage in his heart, sitting alone with his thought, it's good to guard your faith, nor let your grief come forth until it cannot call for help, nor help but heed the path you've placed before it. It's good to find your grace in God, the heavenly rock where rests our every hope. And so at the end of this poem, you have his admonition to put faith in God, that God is everything. And if you just put all your faith in him, it's going to be okay. There's always hope, right? So our warrior here relives his past happy memories as a member of the Lord's band of retainers. But he laments his present hardships, the fact that he has no one and he has nothing, and values forbearance and faith in the heavenly Lord are presented to us. The warrior has been identified as a wanderer who roams the cold seas and walks his paths of exile. He remembers happy days, but he also remembers what happened at the end of them, and he questions what was the point, right? And so we have possibly three phases here in this poem that we can see. At the beginning, we have this solitary man who's all by himself, and then that's coupled with the troubled mind. You know, what is this for? What is the point? And then wisdom comes at the end, right, where he's like, it's all for God. If we put our faith in God, we're good, right? We'll find grace, we'll find freedom. Some people have called this a wisdom poem because it reflects upon life while in exile. And through this poem, towards the end, you see that he has gained this wisdom, this inner calmness and understanding that could only come from, God on high. We do see a few possible themes in the story. We see the beasts of battle, right? What happens whenever battle occurs? You have the remnants of war. We see exile, we see ruin, right? Both the actual ruins that he envisions in his mind and the ruin of him himself. And then we see that he's going on a journey. Joseph Campbell wrote in the 1930s a book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and it's all about the hero's journey, which we're going to talk more about this week with Beowulf. But for now, I hope that you got a lot out of The Wanderer. I know it wasn't too long of a poem, but it was pretty good, and it shows us exactly the type of literature that we see from that time period. We will have questions about this poem on our test in a couple weeks, along with the stuff on Beowulf. Okay, so for today, y'all have a great day, and tomorrow I'm going to post about Beowulf, and you'll have the rest of the week to read that. It is long, so I apologize ahead of time. But it is really good. If you like, the Odyssey and Percy Jackson stuff, that's what it's like. It's an epic poem. Okay, well, y'all have a good day.